Quintet is a pretty mysterious game development company. It was founded in 1989 by director Masaya Mashimoto and writer Tomayashi Miyazaki. Quintet is perhaps best known for their work in ActRaiser, which is widely considered one of the best launch titles for the Super Nintendo. Quintet went on to develop a handful of other excellent titles for the Super Nintendo. However, a candle that burns brightly doesn't burn long, and the company fell silent in 2002. But before being lost to the annals of time, Quintet bestowed upon us a parting gift, a loose collection of excellent games for the Super Nintendo, which some refer affectionately to as the Soul Blazer series. This collection includes Terranigma, Illusion of Gaia, and Soul Blazer. Soul Blazer is a post-apocalyptic action RPG. It was developed by Quintet and published by Enix. It was released in the United States for the Super Nintendo in 1992. The game only sold 70,000 copies in the United States, which is only about half of the number Earthbound would go on to sell 3 years later. Unfortunately, not much else is known about the development of Soul Blazer. In the Empire of Frail, King Magritte has been manipulated into summoning Death Toll, a supremely malevolent being. Upon being released, Death Toll wiped out all life on Earth as we know it. In this game, you play as a silent protagonist known only as Blazer. Blazer is a divine hero sent down by the Master, a supremely benevolent being, in order to restore life on Earth and defeat Death Toll. This sets the stage for a classic battle of good versus evil, which is a refreshing change of pace from today's modern RPGs that often get muddled down by details and complex shades of gray. Now don't get me wrong, every once in a while a good drama is in order, but sometimes it feels good to have clear objectives and motivations. The simple plot is punctuated by dark moments that serve to emotionally sucker punch an unsuspecting player. These dark moments are another staple in the Soul Blazer series. And though I've said that the plot of the game is simple, that's not to say that it is without subtext. King Magritte's name is probably a reference to Megiddo, a hill upon which a biblical battle took place, from which the word Armageddon comes, which is exactly what the king brought about when he summoned Death Toll. Alternatively, his name could be pronounced King Magritte, which could be a reference to his greed, which is what was manipulated in order to summon Death Toll. Also, the Master and Death Toll are a pretty obvious duality, and Death Toll is a corrupter of men. Meanwhile, the Master sends his angelic warrior down to the earth in order to wipe out evil. This is reminiscent of God's sword-slinging angel of death, credited with such things as the Passover, and later slaughtering 185,000 Assyrian warriors in defense of Jerusalem. To top it off, your hero prays to the Master in order to save the game, but despite all of these heavy-handed references to what at first might be considered Middle Eastern religions, the game throws in the monkey wrench that is reincarnation. That, coupled with the fact that the spirits you're reviving belong to plants and animals as well as people, kind of points to Shinto or Buddhism. Just the same, it's interesting to see all of these religious references in a Super Nintendo title, because Nintendo of America in the early 90s had a habit of censoring any and all religious references. Sadly, character development in the game is virtually non-existent. It's pretty clear when playing the game that the team wanted to focus on solid gameplay, and that's exactly what they've delivered. When you arrive in an area that requires revival, there's usually a dungeon open, ready for you to go exploring, and as you do, you'll encounter enemies that pour out of spawn points. When you've defeated all of the monsters for that spawn point, it'll explode, leaving behind a pressure plate of some sort. Stepping on these will reveal hidden items and other spawn points, or release souls of trapped creatures, or it'll open the way forward. Unfortunately, sometimes in order to open the way forward, you have to go back to the town in which you're reviving creatures and speak to one of them. This means backtracking, and this game has a lot of backtracking. And speaking of backtracking, when you're fighting through dungeons, you'll find that there are some areas that you can't complete yet without a certain item. that item becomes available to you after completing several dungeons. Going back and defeating those areas of the dungeons are completely optional, but if you want the best items in the game, and I do, that means backtracking. Soul Blazer controls like your standard action RPG. It gives you 4-directional movement that takes place on a 3/4 perspective top-down map. The character movement is pleasantly quick, though it can make for some difficulty when trying to stand on a specific point in order to progress the game. Blazer swings his sword in a satisfyingly wide arc at the press of a button. Also, you can shoot spells from the orbiting ball of energy that closely follows the player. Movement in the game is tight. It's fun to find new weapons and upgrade your armor. The experience points and leveling system help keep the game feeling rewarding despite the repetitive nature of the game. The game feels well balanced. You won't ever come away unscathed from a battle, but there are enough ways to heal yourself that I always felt like I was given a fighting chance. And when I did die, I didn't feel frustrated with the game because of it. Now, Soul Blazer isn't exactly a pretty game by today's standards, but if we're going to review the game's graphics, we should at least do so given the context of graphics of other games at the time. In 1991, a year before Soul Blazer was released, the action RPG Arcus Odyssey was released for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. A year after the release of Soul Blazer, Landstalker was released for the Sega Genesis. And the year of its release, Nintendo bestowed upon us the gift to humanity that is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Given those points of reference, as much as I like this game, I don't think it was attractive by the day's standards either. However, sometimes the game will do something that'll surprise me, like icicles hanging from the ceiling, or an interesting water effect, or a gorgeous parallax background effect, but for the most part these things have to be looked for, and weren't used to their fullest potential. The game appears to have sacrificed some beauty in exchange for function. It's unfortunate that the design team couldn't find a way to marry the two. There were a few points in the game where the graphics in the game appeared too cluttered, making enemies difficult to make out, which can affect gameplay. Fortunately though, these instances were relatively few and far between. The music in Soul Blazer is pretty much par for the course. It's not distractingly bad, but at the same time it seldom enhances the mood of the game. And sadly, when I'm not playing the game, it's hard to remember a single theme. The sound effects of the game do what you need them to, but you could just as easily play the game with the volume off and just listen to the radio. I've found myself doing that on a couple of occasions during my most recent playthrough. Quintet has remained silent since 2002. Members from the Quintet team have been spotted in the credits of other games developed by companies other than Quintet, such as Mystic Heroes by Koei. However, aside from small roles in game development, Quintet has remained entirely inactive. Any sign of life from the company at this point would surprise most people, and sadly, I don't expect them to be releasing a new game anytime soon. The game publisher, Enix, has actually merged with Squaresoft since the game was released. They have remained active under the name Square Enix. Unfortunately, Square Enix has publicly expressed disdain at the idea of releasing games for the Virtual Console. Despite this, they did release ActRaiser on the Virtual Console in 2008. However, it's been over 2 years since their last release on the Virtual Console, so it's unclear if we'll ever see them release another game on the Virtual Console, including Soul Blazer. Now, because only 70,000 copies of Soul Blazer were sold in the United States, I'd say it's somewhat rare to find one in the wild. However, people don't seem too reluctant to part with their copies, so it can still easily be acquired for about $40 online. Keep in mind, this is 40% higher than the game was selling for just 5 years ago. It's a game without a cult following, without the popularity of games like Earthbound or classic Squaresoft titles. And that's one of the great injustices of the world. But the solid gameplay and uncharacteristically dark moments in the game are what make it a permanent fixture in my memory. And for these reasons, it's also now going to be a permanent fixture in the game collection. So now here's the part in the video where I thank you for all of your support. I wanted to express my sincere gratitude to Fraser and the crew over at Video Games Awesome for mentioning me on Facebook and Twitter. I want to thank each and every one of my subscribers. You guys are the coolest. Also, please leave a comment down in the comment section. I read all of them and I try to respond to all of them, and I try to take all of your suggestions to heart. If you guys are feeling especially generous, feel free to spread the word around all the cool places. Thank you guys so much. It means a lot to me. Thank you.